Welcome to Tasmania in southeastern Australia. Most areas here are inaccessible forests. Most regions are covered by clouds all year round. Some areas have primitive rivers and damp, cool canyons. Snakes, rats, insects, and ants are common. The annual rainfall of 2,400 millimeters is daunting, not to mention the occasional tropical cyclones that can blow everything away. 10 survival experts have been dropped here. The last one standing will be the champion of this season. Due to limited funding from the production team, the prize is only $250,000. However, this does not dampen the contestants' spirits. Chris, 39, makes his first appearance. He is excited at first, but reality quickly hits hard. Frankly, the starting location is not ideal. Setting up a tent alone is problematic. In Tasmania, it rains 250 days a year. Chris doesn't want to get soaked. He needs to quickly find a place to set up a temporary camp. The rainforest terrain differs from other places. The location must be flat and open. Otherwise, falling rotten wood from trees could be lethal. After searching, Chris finally finds a suitable spot. He hums a tune and clears the area. Then, he uses ropes to secure the tent corners. Before he finishes, Chris looks up and freezes. There's a huge wasp nest. Following the first come, first served rule, Chris should move immediately. But with time running out, he has to make do for one night and plan further. Rob, 41, is the second to appear. His luck is better than Chris's. Upon landing, he receives a warm welcome from the island's animals. Hearing roars close by, Rob hopes they are kangaroos or badgers, not grizzly bears. After a while, it quiets down. Rob then finds a place to rest. Gina, 52, is the third contestant. She is thrilled upon arrival. The environment is just like her hometown. She could stay here 3 months with no problem. The trees, the wind, the moss, everything feels familiar. Gina says surviving in the wild is not about defeating nature. If you think that way, nature will punish you severely. The only way to settle in the wild is to remain humble and open your heart to nature. Her understanding alone marks her as a true expert. Beck, 42, is the fourth contestant. Unlike others, Beck is just an ordinary person. She joined the show to challenge herself. She believes her resilience could win her the $250,000. After setting up her filming equipment, Beck starts building her camp. But first, she makes a digging stick. After all, to do a good job, one must first sharpen one's tools. Perhaps because Beck isn't used to being alone, she feels eyes watching her while she works. This unnerves her. Braving her fears, she goes to the river for water and digs a pit at the camp to prepare for a fire. Soon, Beck has a fire going. It seems she is quite capable. Peter, 31, is the fifth contestant. As soon as he lands, Peter wants to go fishing, hoping to catch salmon for dinner. He believes that in the wild, food is the top priority. Without food, it's just a tale of starvation in the wild. Peter finds many signs of animal activity on the riverbank. Setting traps here would surely secure his food supply. The camera shifts back to Chris. He's already got a fire going and is waiting for the creek water to boil. Nearby, there's a small waterfall. Chris, for some reason, is tempted to taste the fresh spring water. Drinking untreated water in the wild poses a great risk due to potential parasites and bacteria, which could end his competition. Yet Chris can't control himself and takes a few sips before feeling satisfied. Meanwhile, Rob has started to build his shelter. He creates notches in 2 trees to support a horizontal log. A tarpaulin thrown over this makeshift structure provides cover. Rob also gathers ferns to use as a mattress, ensuring a comfortable sleep. Before the competition, Rob was a genuine farmer, living a simple and happy life with a beautiful wife, a son, and a daughter. He joined the competition to improve his family's life. After setting up camp, he scouts the area, finds it very damp with thick moss, and notices many signs of kangaroo activity, indicating food might not be hard to come by. Over with Gina, she experiences strong winds before she even starts building her shelter, and rain seems imminent. She races against time, as she's the only contestant who opted out of using a sleeping bag. She quickly ties a rope between 2 trees and drapes a tarp over it, then cleans up the area around her simple shelter. Gina lived in a very primitive place before the competition, without internet, electricity, or even running water. But these challenges honed her survival skills. Participating feels no different from her daily life. If she wins the $250,000, her first task back home will be to install running water. After finishing her shelter, she needs to start a fire. Gina uses a unique method, tearing a part of her t-shirt to wrap around a fire stick, and with a few strokes, she starts a fire efficiently. As night falls on the first day, Rob successfully keeps his fire going, but rain starts immediately after he boils water, continuing throughout the night. The contestants struggle to adapt to the environment, kept awake by the loud rain. Gina's shelter leaks due to its simplicity, while Beck has the worst luck, as her camp is visited by a Tasmanian devil, known for its powerful bite that can overpower lions and tigers. Dawn brings the second day of competition. After a night of rain, all of Rob's wood is wet, and the cold prevents him from starting a fire. Though he lacks a fire to purify drinking water, he collects enough rainwater from the tarp to make do. Missing his family, Rob pulls out their photos. He even contemplates calling them with the satellite phone, but decides against quitting just yet. As light rain resumes, Rob sits under a tree, homesick, and it's unclear how long he can last in this state. On the other side, Beck's fire has gone out, but fortunately, she still has some dry firewood in her shelter. However, she starts crying before she even begins to make a fire. Yes, she misses home too. Beck has never been alone in her life, and her personality isn't suited for solitary wilderness living. After much contemplation by the river, Beck slowly takes out the satellite phone. Regrettably, Beck becomes the first contestant to withdraw after experiencing just one day in the wilderness. On the second day of the competition, Rob's breakfast consists of plain boiled water. After eating, he sits in his camp, missing his family. Perhaps knowing his performance is lacking, he feels even the birds chirping seems to mock him. Then, Rob looks at a family photo, sees his adorable daughter, and questions why he left his comfortable home to starve here. Although the $250,000 prize is tempting, he concludes nothing beats being with his wife and children. The more he thinks, the sadder he gets, eventually breaking down in tears. Unable to endure a life without his family even for a day, Rob too reaches for the satellite phone and becomes the second contestant to quit, having lasted only 2 days. The scene shifts to Gina, who breathes in the fresh air after a day and night of rain. Today's task is to build a permanent shelter. In Gina's view, a sturdy, rain-proof shelter is the key to surviving in the rainforest. Building such a shelter may take several days, during which she won't spend much time searching for food. However, Gina has a plan for this. She gained 19 kilograms before the competition, providing her with 150,000 calories of energy, enough to sustain her early shelter-building efforts. Gina is not only familiar with the competition rules, but has also devised a strategy that might at least see her through to the semifinals. Because it's a permanent shelter, the location must be ideal, elevated to avoid tides, close to a water source, and free from dead trees nearby due to frequent strong winds. She certainly does not want to be hit by falling trees in her sleep. Then enters Mike, the sixth contestant, who is quite tough. To save energy, he doesn't even bother fetching water. He collects rainwater directly from the tarp with his boots and drinks it without boiling, remarking on the good taste. Mike has his own understanding of wilderness survival and excels at making comprehensive plans. His strategy prioritizes food over shelter, as the area doesn't require a sturdy shelter or a warm fireplace like the Arctic might. He believes even a temporary shelter could last 100 days. By focusing on food, Mike even skips making a fire, saving the effort and time needed to maintain it. Mike's approach is quite wild, and whether his strategy works remains to be seen. Jimmy, the youngest competitor this season at 22, was the seventh to appear. He described competing as being like a dream, still feeling surreal about everything. His purpose for joining the competition was to challenge himself. Last night's heavy rain extinguished the campfire, so the plan for the morning was to chop wood to keep it burning. However, chopping wood is physically demanding, and he hadn't eaten since yesterday, which made him start to feel hungry while working. Before the competition, Jimmy lived in a small village and spent most of his time alone outdoors. His parents taught him a lot about wilderness survival, including fishing, trapping, and making traps. He didn't think much about the competition itself, just taking it as far as he could go. But now, Jimmy felt strange, unable to tell if he was cold or hot, possibly due to low blood sugar from not eating. So, he decided to go fishing, grabbed his tools, and headed out. The fishing spot was a distance away from the camp, involving a challenging trek through the terrain, which felt very different from the Arctic with no proper paths and constantly wet ground that was easy to slip on. But Jimmy didn't care much about that now. Getting food was more important, and so he began his fishing career. Meanwhile, Chris also wanted to fish. He noticed a spot in the water bubbling continuously, a sign of either a large catch or fish and shrimp. Before starting, he remembered the old saying, "To do a good job, an artisan needs the best tools." He cut down a straight, long sapling, split and trimmed it to make a sturdy fishing rod. For bait, grabbing a cricket by the river proved much more effective than using modern technology. Chris, too, started his fishing endeavors. Today, Peter probably had the toughest time. He had been careless while setting up camp, hoping a simple shelter would suffice to keep out the rain. However, the overnight storm completely wrecked his camp, soaking all his supplies. His clothes and jacket were unwearable, and even his gloves and socks could wring out water. He faced significant losses on his first day and spent considerable effort fixing the tarp and campsite. On the other hand, Gina finally finished selecting a site for her camp. She picked some thick wood from the forest and carried the logs back to camp, bundling every 3 with shoelaces and setting them up into an A-frame structure. Her camp construction proceeded methodically under her efforts. Pilot Mike also wanted to fish, so he went to the water's edge and dug out some worms from nearly rotten logs, a favorite food for trout. Securing a meal of spicy grilled fish was now only a matter of time. Before starting, however, Mike had to address the complex water surface environment at his location, which could cause problems retrieving the hook. He decided to build a kayak to reach deeper waters for a better fishing setup, starting immediately on the construction. Returning to Hunter Peter, he had set many traps along the riverbank yesterday, and today was the day to check them. Finding them all empty despite nearby tracks puzzled him. After wandering the dense forest for 2 hours without encountering any game or even hearing animals, Peter felt increasingly disheartened. Despite his hunting skills, without game, his efforts were in vain. Returning to the handsome Jimmy, he went back to the shelter without catching any fish. By the afternoon, he still felt unwell. So Jimmy took out the COVID test kit provided by the show's crew and vigorously swabbed his nose. Minutes later, the result revealed that Jimmy had accidentally contracted COVID-19. This was a surprising turn of events. Initially hoping to earn a significant sum, he was diagnosed with COVID-19 just a day into the event. With no room for debate, it was just sheer bad luck. Jimmy then informed the show's crew about his situation over the phone. When the medical team arrived, they were fully equipped and performed a basic check on him. His heart rate was now between 120 and 130, making continued participation in the contest clearly unrealistic. Consequently, Jimmy became the 3rd contestant to be eliminated. Just like the first night, it rained all night again. Keeping dry was indeed uncomfortable. As for Mike, he still hadn't managed to find food, but fortunately, he still had his exclusive secret breakfast. Waking up, he took several big gulps from his boot. Before the competition, Mike had gained 19 kilograms over 2 months, believing this fat would sustain him for at least a month. Yet, despite his endurance, the feeling of hunger was still unbearable. His immediate concern was to find food, as his boat-building plans were not yet feasible. Mike decided to try fishing first. He chopped a long, straight tree and tied a fishing line at the end. For bait, he already had a plan. Seeing a hole in a nearby tree yesterday, he assumed it harbored something. With an axe strike, he hit the jackpot. The insects he found were rich in protein, making them excellent fishing bait. After setting up his fishing rod with the bait, a leaf at the top served as his float. From a distance, he could simply watch the float to see if he caught any fish. Mike was multitasking, proving his skills. However, one fishing rod was clearly not enough. Mike planned to make more in order to increase his chances of catching fish. Next was the 8th female contestant, Kate. For the first 2 days, Kate also struggled to find food, but she didn't feel hungry until the 3rd day. While wandering through the forest, she only encountered a few mushrooms larger than her palm. Fortunately, on her way back to the shelter, she found a patch of reeds whose roots were edible. Casually chopping a few, she found them crisp to bite into. Kate, an ecology PhD focused on wildlife before joining the contest, had extensive experience across Australia and was passionate about hiking. She believed these experiences would help her rank highly in the contest. Back at the shelter, Kate also turned to fishing to supplement her protein intake, using shrimp worms from the riverbank as bait. However, after several hours, no fish had bitten the live bait, suggesting the absence of fish in that spot. She decided to change locations and continue fishing. On the third day, Chris was unusually excited in the morning due to a wonderful dream he had about endless scallops and chicken wings. Yet, reality hit as the camera showed him eating grass. Eager to make his dream come true, Chris took a club and went hunting, aiming to catch a possum to satisfy his cravings. Along the way, he found a piece of dead wood, a natural den preferred by possums. Checking both ends, he found no signs of possum activity. Despite Australia's lush vegetation, its wildlife resources paled in comparison to places like the Arctic, where squirrels and grouse were abundant. Undeterred, Chris returned to the shelter and tried catching rain shrimp, but after several hours, he returned empty-handed. Peter also went hunting. He crossed mountains and waded through waters, but as usual, encountered nothing. Peter explained that he is a professional hunter who specializes in using a shotgun. However, the show's rules prohibit firearms, making him uncomfortable in the competition. Despite finding many mushrooms, he knew they were inedible and could only return to camp empty-handed. Unsure of what to do next, Peter voiced his frustration. Even as an excellent hunter, without game, he felt helpless. Meanwhile, Kate noticed movement on her fishing float and slowly reeled in an eel. She handled the hard-earned protein with care, delivering 2 swift blows to secure it. Eels are not to be underestimated. They contain 15% fat and provide 200 calories per 100 grams. With food secured, Kate hurried back to her shelter to cook the eel, becoming the first contestant of the season to consume protein. Dwayne, the season's 9th contestant, found 2 mole crickets by a tree root. He found them rather disgusting, but used them as bait for fishing. Before he could start, however, a heavy rain began, and he discovered a hole in his rain cover. With no other option, he used an axe to hold the cover in place. Chris felt despondent today, having caught neither possums nor lobsters. Restless and prone to overthinking, he decided to keep busy by weaving a fishing net. Having suffered severe stress disorder during his military service in the Middle East, Chris often felt anxious. While making the net, he experienced chest tightness and decided to go fishing to calm down, though he doubted he could last much longer in his current state. Mike was actively building a boat, believing that setting up fishing nets in the river would yield a continuous catch. Still, he recognized the gap between imagination and reality. To expedite the boat's construction, he chopped down another tree and crafted a hammer handle using an axe and a knife. He took great care in preparing the canoe's beams, ensuring no bark or splinters could puncture the boat. However, he knew his efforts would be wasted if he failed to catch any fish. Back to Chris, his fishing rod finally showed signs of life. Although the fish was small, trout not only provide protein but also valuable vitamins and have a great taste. Excited about the prospect of fish soup for dinner, Chris danced joyfully. On his way back to the shelter, he shouted into the forest, "Possums, you're safe for now." Peter was having the toughest time. After another fruitless walk and a fall that resulted in a bruised knee and a bump on the back of his head, he felt utterly dejected. Reviewing his recent plight, his rain cover failed on the first day, soaking all his gear. The second day brought no gains, and today was no better. Back at the shelter, Peter began packing his equipment, feeling no point in continuing. Like a card game, he could have persevered with a decent hand, but facing such scarcity, he saw no reason to continue suffering. Resigned, Peter called the show's crew to discuss his situation. The camera shifts to Mike, who continues his shipbuilding project methodically. Despite Tasmania's limited resources, Mike believes that once the ship is completed, he can set up permanent fishing lines and gill nets in deeper waters to solve the food issue once and for all. Considering the long-term strategy, he thinks it's worth enduring a few more days of hunger. Today, Mike went to gather wood from the forest when he noticed marks on a tree, which he identified as those made by a possum. This is the first sign of animal activity he has seen since arriving at the competition site. Consequently, Mike plans to set up a trail camera to see if he can capture the possum. Dwayne, who has been rarely seen, finally makes an appearance. Up to now, he has been living in a temporary shelter that requires him to crawl to enter, and he wishes to leave it as soon as possible. In fact, Dwayne started building a permanent shelter on the second day, but intermittent rain has delayed the progress. His shelter, which is the most luxurious of the season, is entirely made of wooden frames. Even the walls are made of sturdy wood. He built such a large shelter hoping it would withstand any weather and help him win the $250,000 prize. However, I always felt that Dwayne might end up like his predecessors, who abandoned their grand houses. Unfortunately, the shelter collapsed while installing the last wall, thwarting his moving plans for the day and forcing him to spend another night in the original shelter. The last contestant of the season, Michael, also makes an appearance. As the final contestant, Michael must be competent. For breakfast, he collected dew from a tarp, even ignoring the small animal droppings on it by pretending they didn't exist. Michael, a rural veterinarian before the competition, leads a life not much different from solitary wilderness living. He owns several hills in South Wales where he usually hunts, fishes, and catches lobsters, so his survival skills are well honed. His best skill is problem solving. Today, Michael plans to explore the mountains, hunt some game along the way, and familiarize himself with the terrain. The path started densely vegetated, but soon widened. Under a tree root, Michael found a patch of reeds, which taste quite good and make a decent lunch when game is scarce. However, as he progressed, the trail became more complicated, often requiring him to crawl, and he gradually lost his way. Now, finding any game is less of a concern than returning to his shelter before dark. Meanwhile, Mike's shipbuilding is troubled by Tasmania's unpredictable weather, with rain interrupting work every few minutes, alternating with clear skies. After just completing the boat's frame, rain forced him to retreat to his shelter to work on designing a luxurious fishing rod, confident it would at least get him through to the semi-finals. Upon testing the rod at the river, a sudden downpour cut the fishing short, emphasizing the season's challenging weather. Michael, still in the mountainous woods, has been lost for 2 hours, growing increasingly anxious. Even if he called for rescue, the crew might not find him immediately. After consulting his compass and deciding to head south, he continued until 4 p.m. without any clue of his whereabouts. Half an hour later, hearing the sound of a river and following the downhill terrain, he felt hopeful of finding a way out. Finally, 40 minutes before dark, Michael made it back to his shelter, exhausted and without any game. On day 5 of the competition, Mike checked the video footage and was thrilled to see a possum moving around. Without prey traces, he could have focused on building his boat. Now with a possum sighted, his attention was completely captured. Eager for protein, he decided to drop all other tasks and focus on crafting a large net to catch the possum. Kate, the only intellectual contestant, enjoyed her eel meal yesterday, but it was too greasy. She plans to use her strengths and find some vegetables in the forest, needing fiber after the oily eel. She found some coffee berries and, knowing they were edible, decided to test them first. She crushed the berries and applied them to the sensitive skin inside her elbow, then collected a large batch and returned to her shelter. After confirming no allergic reactions, she safely started her lunch. The berries were tart and sweet, resembling raspberries. Dwayne's shelter is almost complete, making today a perfect moving day. He just needs to finish the roof with a waterproof cover. Once done, he could live there for a year, enjoying the solitude of Tasmania. However, his plan to collect firewood was ruined by a sudden heavy rain, forcing him to start preparing for fishing from inside the shelter. Meanwhile, Gina took off her shoes again, enjoying walking barefoot on soft moss. Her house modifications were nearly complete. Today, by arranging her bedding, she could sleep comfortably even without a sleeping bag. She built a frame and fixed the bed planks about 20 to 30 centimeters off the ground, placing ribs between them and covering them with a soft leather coat. By evening, she was done, and she looked well rested the next morning. Just as she was anticipating a fresh start, she heard noises from the river and rushed to check. It was a platypus swimming, a creature known to be inedible, even in dire straits. Chris is still working on his net, showing signs of nervousness. He has not completed any task, from catching fish to hunting. He revisited a tree hollow where he had previously seen no possum traces. Considering the risks of poisonous snakes, he hesitated to explore a large tree hollow he could crawl into. Fearing a snake bite in such a secluded spot, he withdrew. He was certain the hollow housed a possum, likely not at home at the time. Chris then tried fishing, setting up 5 rods, but hours passed with no bites. Frustrated, he lamented the scarcity of resources feeling his efforts were in vain and losing confidence day by day. This afternoon, Mike finally completed his large net. Now he just needs to set up the trap, and he might enjoy a delicious possum meal tonight. Mike's trap is a bit complex to describe. It involves laying the net on the ground and setting a trigger. If an animal triggers it, a piece of wood suspended from a tree lifts the net. By the time Mike had set up the trap, it was dark. He felt that this trap was less practical than a simple rabbit snare. Restless, he couldn't sleep until 9 p.m., constantly thinking about checking the trap. Finally, at 10 p.m., he couldn't resist and went to check, only to find the trap empty, undisturbed. Disappointed, Mike checked the camera tied to the tree and saw that a possum had indeed approached the trap, but was scared away by the sound of his footsteps. Chris has been starving, his back sticking to his chest from hunger. Throughout the competition, except for catching a trout on day 3, he has gone 5 days without food. He desperately needs a turning point, otherwise he doesn't know how to continue. Suddenly, Chris noticed a movement on his fishing rod. Another trout. With this fish, his plummeting confidence instantly surged.
I feel like I should be more excited, like I'm absolutely in shock. Oh, no way. Wow. Okay. I can go in there like that. Don't never not ever give up. There's nowhere else I want to be right now than here. And that's honestly the truth.
Gina encountered some trouble today. For unknown reasons, she developed large patches of hives on her thighs. The bumps were red and itchy and could not be scratched. Gina had to work around the camp without pants, finishing up her shelter. She then nailed 7 wooden stakes in front of her shelter and tied lines above them. She brought a bundle of sagebrush and started weaving it through the lines like fabric, creating a door curtain. After moving to his new home, Dwayne felt great and even tried surfing by the river, though his falling technique was not pretty. With his shelter completed, the competition moved to the next phase, focusing on securing food. Hunting seemed out of the question for Dwayne. His only hope was fishing. Lacking a float in his 10 items, he dismantled buttons from his raincoat and used the springs as sinkers. While fishing, Dwayne's stomach constantly growled, urging him to find food quickly. Unfortunately, after fishing all afternoon, he caught nothing. Chris, after feasting on the fish, relaxed under the sun at his camp and decided to take a bath to fully unwind. However, the temperature was only 9 degrees Celsius. Chris regretted entering the water immediately and started swearing.
God almighty, that's bloody cold! Oh.
He overlooked a crucial fact. The water body was already nearly devoid of fish, and his disturbance might cause him to starve for the next few days. Clearly, Chris hadn't realized the severity of the situation, or he wouldn't have casually played with stacking stones. Gina estimated she had lost 7 kilograms and could almost button up pants that previously didn't fit. She continued working on the door curtain, and the good news was that she expected to finish it by tonight. As night fell, she installed the curtain on her shelter. After 8 days of non-stop work, her living situation was finally sorted. Next, she planned to focus on securing food, believing she could be the first woman to win. Mike's engineering project is still ongoing. Besides that, he made a fishing rod and a spike net trap. However, he has yet to secure any food. He went back to the mountain to check the trap, but unfortunately, it still had not caught a possum. The surveillance showed the possum returned after he left. It seemed to smell the trap, moving through it without setting it off. Mike then decided to add more triggers on both sides. It's possible the reason he hasn't caught the possum is due to their keen sense of smell. Human scent might have been left on the trap, allowing the possum to avoid it. As of now, Mike is the only contestant who hasn't made a fire. Initially, he thought maintaining a fire would be too draining, but now, considering he might soon obtain food, he planned a fire pit in front of his camp. Given Tasmania's frequent rain every few minutes, he also needed to construct a rain shelter for it. He found a robust tree, chopped off a large, intact piece of bark with his axe, and used it as a protective cover for the fire pit. Dwayne, still without food, rested at the shelter and decided to try fishing elsewhere. He found a new bay and repeatedly cast his line. Just as his patience was wearing thin, he finally felt a tug. Catching the fish greatly improved Dwayne's mood.
Ah, I'm happy. Mwah.